welcome back. This is now my third vlog. I just got back from the gym. I relieved some stress and anxiety. That's how I like to do that. I'm now about to eat some dinner. And the relieving of stress and anxiety at the gym reminded me about something I learned in facilitation by some of my other classmates. So that's what we'll be talking about in this video. In Sean's, Pam's, and Andrew's discussion leader facilitation, I learned a lot about writing anxiety. And I learned a lot about what causes it in students, how to relieve it from students, and it also informed me a lot about my own teaching and how I can make sure that as students write down their math problems or write down solutions, write notes in terms of math, or just taking tests in general and having to write out answers, I learned a lot about what methods I can implement to make sure that I can relieve as much writing anxiety in my students as possible. So what I learned in general from their presentation at the end of it was that a lot of students have writing anxiety, and writing anxiety could be caused by a lot of things. It could be caused by timed exams and having to finish, for example, an essay in under an hour. It could be the fact that teachers watch students as they work, and then they are scared to write anything down because the teacher's observing them. It could be caused by just not knowing the material and having to write something and turn it in is just scary for them. Or students may not be at the level that the school wants them to be at in terms of writing, so therefore any assignment that they have to turn in for a grade gives them anxiety because they feel like they can't write up to the expectations that the teacher in the school has for them. I also learned about signs of writing anxiety, signs that maybe one can actually see and observe. Some of this includes shaking and sweating and showing signs of like clearly being uncomfortable when given the assignment to write anything. I definitely experienced this in my own academic experience. More specifically with AP exams, because we were instructed to complete 3 essays in 2 hours. And I remember how stressful that was for me. I constantly moved my leg up and down. I would start breathing more heavily, my heart rate would go up. And so this is definitely something that I don't want any of my students to have to experience to the extent possible. Sometimes test anxiety, sometimes writing anxiety can't always be completely avoidable. It all depends on the person. However, I know that now, after listening to their presentation and facilitation, that there are many ways that I can implement strategies in my classroom that can help at least reduce the writing anxiety that my students have while they learn and complete math-related things. So, some of the things that I can implement in my classroom to make sure that I reduce as much writing anxiety as possible for my students is to include word walls. I use this example a lot in class. However, I think they're pretty crucial depending on how you use it. Students can definitely refer to it all the time, and I think it could really help with writing anxiety in a math class. How I envision doing my word walls in the future is I'll have like certain words on a bulletin board, and then around the word are words that are pretty much synonymous or symbolize the same thing. So I could do one for adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. And I could say, well, adding also means plus, adding also means in addition to, stuff like that. Subtracting means minus, difference, take away, stuff like, and the examples go on and on. And I think that as students complete assignments, especially if they're looking at word problems where they have to take a word problem and translate it into an equation that they have to solve for a missing variable, I think word walls can be very helpful in helping students decipher words that they're still getting used to. Another thing that I think would be really helpful that definitely relieved test anxiety for me was the opportunity to do test corrections. Test anxiety in general is very common, and I think that especially when it comes to math and making silly mistakes with arithmetic, and like just one silly mistake at one step can lead to just all wrong answers afterwards. I think test corrections and gaining a little bit of points back after having a second attempt at doing it is really helpful, because then students can really showcase what they knew, but in the moment or with the time crunch, like something happened and simply they know how to do it, they just like made the little silly mistake. Another thing that I also really like, that I think others like as well, is letting students be able to use cheat sheets. So giving them, especially for a final exam, giving them an index card and letting them write whatever they want on the index card so they can use it during the test. That way they can study the material, have stuff on it, so therefore they have something there where it's like, oh, I can refer to it if necessary. Additionally, to help with anxiety, I think it would be really effective if I were to model my own writing first before I tell my students to write proofs, for example, or write out solutions to equations through words. In my college experience, I was once put in a position where I had to start writing proofs and submitting them for like a homework grade before we even learned the content and how to prove them themselves. And I remember feeling really stressed out about that because I didn't know what the professor expected of me. I didn't know if I was even doing the proof right. I mean, so being able to see how an instructor writes and seeing how they model whatever it is that students are learning at that time, I think is really helpful, because then students will always be able to like look back at their notes or remember that lecture and be like, oh yeah, that's how they did it, so let me try to model the same type of writing style. I also think it would be really great if students had the opportunity to work on writing assignments together. That way, if someone really struggles with writing or struggles with writing anxiety, they at least have someone to help them and collaborate with to finish assignments. And I think just making writing prompts as fun as possible and giving students the freedom to write whatever they feel about math. So implementing writing journals where they can write, I learned this today, or I'm a little bit confused on this, or this is how I would explain the problem, stuff like that. So I think implementing those prompts and trying to make the writing assignments like more as a practice rather than as a grade definitely help with reducing writing anxiety. What I learned specifically from Sean's, Pam's, and Andrew's outside research from their facilitation, I learned about a lot of statistics relating to students and writing anxiety. So I learned that 81% of middle school students report being afraid of not being understood in their writing, which is significantly higher than I thought, which is really sad. 46% said that writing creates stress. 26% report wanting to avoid writing due to critics about their writing. I feel like that through my secondary education experience, I believe I was part of this population as well. But these statistics just come to show that writing anxiety is a very prevalent issue, and I'm very glad that I'm aware of it now so that I can try to address it and relieve it for my students in the future to the best of my ability. The other leader discussion facilitation that I learned a lot from was from Aaron and Alex's presentation on word association. I learned about word association, what it is, and the different parts of it. Specifically, I learned about mental lexicons and how this is kind of like our mental dictionary. In general, for everyone, we associate words with different meanings. We associate words with different words, and we kind of learned about this and saw it happen when we played an association game. And it's very interesting because everyone has different connections with different words. So you may think words are similar just based on the letters in the actual word itself, or like you may associate by the meaning or the category, stuff like that. And I think it's really crucial that we're aware of like how people associate words differently, because for English language learners and native English speakers, we are constantly making new connections every day. And so it's important that, especially as students are continuing to grow and their brains are developing, it's important to establish as many word connections as possible, because then they'll be successful in their discipline when associating terminology with meaning and stuff like that, and how to implement that, how to apply it. So as a math teacher, I plan on doing my best to help students make connections between math terminology by having mathematical discussions where I encourage the use of mathematical language. So if any student is struggling with understanding the meaning of a word, I will help them and guide them to using it in sentences, help them with, okay, well, this is what it means, this is how you articulate it, and then they can watch their peers experience the same thing. The reason I think this is especially important in math is because, especially when you read word problems, you have to be able to associate the word with the symbol. And so it's not just words to words, it's words to symbols and variables. So I believe it's vital that students develop those connections with those symbols so that they can take words and then translate it into an equation that they can solve. I think that I can also use word walls to address this, but I also think just modeling how I communicate, how I say words using very specific terminology, but also making sure that students are aware of what the terminology means before I keep using it in a sentence. So perhaps having students create a log where they have the term with the meaning or the term with the symbol, stuff like that. Encouraging good note-taking, good discussion strategies, and just making sure I model that for my students so that they can hopefully learn from it over time. Specifically from Aaron and Alex outside research, I learned mainly definitions about word association and the stuff that's included in that. So I learned that a majority of word association literature focuses on two main organizing principles of language. So I learned about syntagmatic relations and paradigmatic relations. So syntagmatic relations involve associations where the words could be related by a phrase or syntactic structure, like summer vacation or water bottle. They can both be used in the same sentence, one doesn't replace the other, and by somehow like they're kind of related in some way based on how we view those words. And on the other hand, paradigmatic associations involve the other words that could replace the original word. So they wouldn't necessarily go together, they could be opposites, but they would just replace each other within the sentence. So summer could be winter, stuff like that. So I learned about like definitions like that in those examples, and I think they're kind of cool to think about because I never really thought about associations and like synonyms and all that in those ways before. So, but I think it's really cool that they presented that and how I can think about that as I become a teacher.